I just recently finished playing Infamous Second Son, and I wanted to take a little bit of time here to give my final thoughts on the game and let you guys know what my overall experience with this game has been like. I did platinum the game, so for anybody who's wondering how much of it I did complete, I pretty much did everything that there was to do, and it's a really solid game, honestly. And the first thing I want to say is that it does get me particularly excited to see what Ghost of Tsushima is going to end up being like, because the number one thing I walked away with after playing Infamous Second Son is that it's a great game, but it's not a phenomenal game. It's not a game that I could necessarily say is on the same level as some of Sony's other games or some of the other studios that are under Sony. For example, like God of War or Spider-Man, even looking at games like Uncharted 4 and The Last of Us, Horizon Zero Dawn. And that's not a knock on Sucker Punch or Infamous Second Son, but the thing is, you can just tell that they have yet to reach their full potential. And so seeing what they could do with a game that, it came out a little while ago. I believe it came out in 2014. It was one of the earlier PS4 titles we got, and it was also still within the, Infamous universe. So it's, interesting to me to think what Sucker Punch is going to be able to do with Ghost of Tsushima, not only because they've been working on it for so long, but because we now know that, they're just surrounded by these god-tier studios, and I think Sucker Punch is really one of the final Sony studios that is right there on the cusp of becoming that next-level studio, and I could just get a clear sense of that when playing Infamous Second Son, because, again, it was a great game, and talking about the gameplay first and foremost, it was extremely fun. It was loose, it was fluid, and it just felt really good, honestly. Now, this is my only time, or my first time, I should say, playing an Infamous game, so I can't speak to the other ones, although I have heard good things. But the gameplay of this was really fun. It was rewarding as well. It was satisfying, especially when you think about the special move abilities that you get with each different power. Those were incredibly satisfying to use. And speaking to the powers themselves, switching between smoke and neon and eventually getting rock, but also having video powers, it was really cool. It was this just kind of unique feeling where just switching from one power to the other while also having a bunch of different upgrades at your disposal. Now, don't get me wrong, the template for how each power played out was pretty much the same, but they did offer a unique feel with each of them. They did feel different enough to justify having different powers, and in certain cases when you're in combat, you do have to kind of think about which power you want to use, which one you feel most comfortable with, and in some cases there are certain powers that are just going to help you a lot more in certain fights than others. And I just really like the way Sucker Punch did that. I like the way the upgrade system worked, where it kind of fed into the overall story of the game, where you have a good side and an evil side, and depending on which path you choose determines some of the upgrades you can or cannot get. And so it kind of incentivizes you to experiment and play the game more than once to see everything there is, and that's exactly what I did. So I think with the gameplay, Sucker Punch just really nailed it. It was just a really fun game, honestly, and, the open world of Seattle was done really well. I will say it did feel a little bit lifeless at times. A lot of the citizens walking around just kind of felt like carbon copies of one another, and they would kind of all just yell out the same things over and over again. But it's not a big deal. I feel like that's something that hopefully with Ghost of Tsushima, I believe Ghost of Tsushima is going to be an open world game. I hope that they can do a better job of kind of like making just the world feel a little bit more alive. But the actual look of Seattle, it looked really good. It was a really good looking game. Speaking to the graphics for a minute here, I was kind of surprised to see just how good it looked when playing it on the PS4 Pro in the graphics mode. For a game that came out at the beginning of this generation, it really holds its own, especially when looking at like the streets of Seattle, looking at the lighting, the textures. It all looks really good. And the one area where I feel like it really kind of stood out was just the effects, right? When you're actually absorbing more powers, specifically with neon. When your neon's running low and you go to a neon sign and you absorb it, it looks incredible. I was actually really kind of blown away by it. Like, I haven't really seen a game that had these type of effects, it feels like, in a while, right? Like, they just looked so cool. And same thing with smoke and video, but specifically with those neon powers. They looked very, very cool. So, graphically speaking and gameplay-wise, it's a solid game. The only thing I would say is a negative here, specifically with the open world and the way the game looks, or not even the way the game looks, but pretty much just the open world. It just felt a little bit lifeless in some cases, and I feel like it would have been elevated to that next level if they did a better job in really fleshing it out and making it seem like, when you're walking the streets of Seattle, really feels like it's bustling with life, and it doesn't kind of take you out of it when you see the same carbon copy of a citizen like 5 times within 1 block radius, right? Because that's kind of what was happening there. But the gameplay was awesome, and, talking about the story here for a minute, I think that the story was actually really good, and this is the aspect that does get me pretty excited for Ghost of Tsushima, to see just how much better they can do, because you can tell they can do better. Like, the writing of Infamous Second Son was pretty solid, the acting was really good, the characters themselves were pretty good as well. Like, Delsin Rowe as a character, not the most interesting, but, the dynamic he had between him and his brother Reggie, I thought was actually pretty good, and I feel like there was more they could have done with it, and the story sometimes felt like the pacing of it was fine, but it did feel like it was a little bit short, or there was a little bit more they could have fleshed out if they wanted to, especially with Delsin and his brother there, because I thought that they had a really good dynamic. But what they did with the other side characters as well, like Fetch and Eugene, they definitely did a good job, and I know that apparently there is a DLC where it's like a prequel where you play as Fetch, but they did a good job. And, I have to really say that with Augustine, the main villain of the game, they did a particularly good job with her, because she really came off as a good villain. Like, she just had this kind of attitude where it's just like, oh man, like, this is a good villain here. But what really kind of caught me off guard was when I completed the game, because I did complete the good path as well as the bad path. Obviously I did get the platinum, like I said. It surprised me that she actually, they tried towards the end to make you sympathize with her a little bit more and really just kind of understand her motivations as a character, as a villain, where, like, she is a human being, and she has reasons for doing what she's doing. And I think, Sucker Punch was trying to go for this a little bit of like a gray area type thing, and I think that they achieved that. But overall, what I really liked most about this game, and I think the most unique aspect to it, and again, I don't know if this was something that was featured in past Infamous games or not, but the ability to choose between a light and dark path, and I was actually quite surprised at just how dark Delsin Rowe could become as a character, just how infamous, I guess you could say, you could become, where you're just doing some bad things. Like, there was that one scene where, with that character Hank, and his daughter's on the boat waiting for him, and you have to decide whether to let him go and let him live, or you can actually kill him. And I was really surprised just how, like, dark you could be by choosing to kill him, and they just show you straight up, like, ending this guy when his daughter's right over there, like, waiting for him. And I was like, man, like, you can really make Delsin walk a dark path. And the evil ending also surprised me a little bit, where, you go back to your home, to your people, and your aunt just basically shuns you and says, you have brought great shame to our people, like, you're an evil person now, have you seen the things you've done? And she just shuts the door on him, and his response is to do one of his dive bombs and just to take out his entire people and his entire home where he came from. And it ended there, and I was like, wow, it was a little bit more powerful than I was expecting. Like, it was pretty intense, right? I just wasn't expecting it to be that heavy, I guess, in a way. But again, this is where you can tell, like, they were truly on to something here, that they're just so close to sticking the landing, man, to, like, making this game story-wise be on the same level as some of the other games. But it was better than I expected, and that's the thing that surprised me the most, is I didn't have much expectation for this game, especially knowing it was a game that came out, earlier this generation, and I'm not familiar with Sucker Punch and their work, and I'm quite surprised at just how much fun I had with the game. Going back to the gameplay here for a minute, talking about the boss encounters and the overall enemies, there was enough variety in the enemies themselves. They overall, I would say most of them felt samey. There were a few though that did stand out, where there's like, I guess like we could call them like mini bosses, where there's, you know, there's guys that have the same rock power as Augustine does, and they're pretty powerful. There's like these Juggernaut type characters. There's the Gatling gun character, and so you do have to, you know, kind of change up your playstyle and be a little bit more careful when you're encountering them. And I noticed that when you pretty much complete the first half of the game and segue into the second half of the game, you know, the enemies become a little bit more powerful and they become a little bit more intense, and you have to just be a little bit more careful with how you play and a little bit more thoughtful. And one thing that I, again, really loved about the gameplay was just how smooth it felt, and also just how fun some of the abilities were, especially when you save up to do your special move and you just take out a whole group of enemies at once. That felt really good and really satisfying. The actual boss battles themselves with Augustine were pretty good as well. I was confused at first because I expected the game to end at one part where, you know, Delson's brother died, and then you're taking on Augustine, and he's all, you know, revved up because of that. I thought that was a really cool moment. I thought that that was the final boss battle for some reason. I'm not sure why I thought that, and I was surprised to find out it wasn't. And the actual boss battle, when you're basically facing her as this big rock monster, that was actually really awesome. My only problem with this is the fact that they waited till this part in the game, which it makes sense why they did it, but you know, to finally give you rock powers pretty much when the game's over was a little bit disappointing. Granted, if you didn't do all of the side content, you could still use the rock powers and flesh them out to, you know, take on most of the side content. But speaking to that for a minute here as well, there is a lot of side content because this is an open world game, and a lot of it just feels, I'm not going to lie to you, a lot of it feels kind of redundant. There are some things, though, that were pretty cool. I'm not going to lie. I had a lot of fun using the DualShock 4 controller as a spray can to do certain tag spots, and you can choose whether you want to do, you know, good or bad. And I thought that that was really cool, too. I like the implementation of all the different features that the DualShock 4 offers. I think that Sucker Punch did a good job with that, you know, finding a way to actually utilize it. And I think that the spray paint can thing for me was one of the most unique ways I've actually used the DualShock 4. So that was pretty cool. But most of the other side content, other than taking on the big DUP base stations, it's necessary. Like, they do a good job in rewarding you with skill points to continue to level up, but there just seemed to be a little bit too much, right? It starts to at some point, and this is honestly with most open world games. So I'm not really just knocking Infamous Second Son for this, but a lot of games do this thing where they just put so much side content, and I guess they feel the need to do that because they want you to explore the open world, but eventually you do enough of it, it really starts to feel redundant and a little bit repetitive, and that definitely did happen, especially with my second playthrough of this game, and that's probably my biggest gripe, is that when you do your second playthrough, you kind of have to do some of the side content so you can continue to upgrade so you're not too weak, especially if you're playing on expert mode, which, talking about that for just a second here, the difficulty of the game, on normal mode, it was perfectly fine. You can kind of get through it as long as you're just paying attention to what you're doing. And then playing it on expert mode was not nearly as difficult as I was expecting. I didn't find myself getting frustrated, and the challenge was there to an extent, but it really wasn't that bad. I mean, if you were actually just trying to do good, you could certainly get through on expert mode, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I don't think Infamous Second Son is the type of game that needs to be crushingly hard. But, you know, it's just for anybody who may be looking for that extra challenge. I just don't think it was there. But, yeah, I'm just trying to make sure I'm covering everything here because, you know, as you can tell, my overall experience with this game was a really good one. And again, to kind of end this video, I am really, really looking forward now to what Sucker Punch is going to do differently, especially knowing that Ghost of Tsushima is a completely new IP. You know, if there's one thing I've learned is they know how to make a game fun to play, which is the most important part of any game. You know what I mean? Like, the story wasn't next level, but that didn't take away from my experience because by the end of it, I was just like, wow, that was incredibly fun. And it did still have a really good story, right? Like, that's the thing. I'm just curious to see if they can really just ramp it up with Ghost and really take it to the next level with both the story as well as the open world. But if there's one thing I know for sure I can expect with Ghost of Tsushima is the gameplay is going to feel really, really good. Granted, it does look completely different from Infamous Second Son, which is a good thing. But yeah, I really enjoyed this game. I did have a few, negatives here where the open world felt a little bit bland, and some of the side content, if not most of it, at times felt a little bland, like trying to go for all the drones or taking out all of the, DUP stations. It felt necessary, but it didn't stop it from feeling a little bit redundant and a little bit repetitive at times. And so hopefully, when we do get Ghost of Tsushima, one of the biggest things I'm hoping for is that whatever they choose to add to the open world as side quests and side content, that it feels a little bit more meaningful than what we got in Infamous Second Son, because I feel like that's one of the only main things that was holding this game back. That and the fact that they could have done a better job fleshing out some of the characters or adding just more to the story than there was there. But yeah, that's pretty much going to do it for the video, guys. I hope you did enjoy it. I'm going to be interested to see what you guys have to say. Have you played Infamous Second Son? Do you agree with some of the points I made here? If you don't agree with them, let me know why you don't. And be sure to leave this video a like if you did enjoy it. It lets me know you guys enjoy these reviews, and it encourages me, honestly, to continue doing them for you guys, because it's a fun thing here, to experience these games. So yeah, do that. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you're new. Hit the bell notification icon, and feel free to share this video out on top of all that. But until next time, guys, take care.